Welcome back to the Cat Dad Show. Thanks for tuning in to another episode. My name is Scott Colby. I'm your host. And have you ever struggled with pet loss grief? I know I have. It can be a just a heavy topic, but I'm excited to actually share this conversation with you with Chelsea Kramer. She's a therapist out in Seattle, Washington, specializing in grief, anxiety, and trauma. Chelsea, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, me too. And we have a similar grieving journey that we're going to dig into. We both lost our precious soul cats. But I just want to start off with something a little bit more light and tell me what you're grateful for today and then what
Mm,
pets you currently have.
yeah, that's a great question. Honestly, what I'm really grateful for today is time with my kitty I have right now because she has cancer and she's actually doing really well. And so I'm really grateful that she's doing awesome and we get to spend time together.
Hmm.
And I work from home as you do as well. So I get to spend time with her. And I have Z is my cat. And I also have a dog named Hattie who's about 3 years old, and Z is 10 years old.
Z is 10. Okay.
Mhm.
Well, I'm grateful for my two new cats that I got 4 months ago. They just turned 1, Nico
Oh,
and Milo. So, yeah, they just are bringing so much joy to my life. So, people, if you're viewing this, you may be dealing with pet loss grief, and it is a heavy topic. And, Chelsea has her own grieving journey, as do I, but she also helps people who are going through pet loss grief. So, we're going to answer just some questions that I know people probably have who are going through this. And Chelsea, we met in a Facebook group, and you mentioned that you lost your soul cat in February of 2020. So sorry about that.
yeah.
But I was wondering if you could share what that what that journey has been like for you.
Yay. Woof. Um, See, even I start to get choked up about
Mm.
it when I talk about him. Um, so Sherbert was the love of my life. And I was fortunate enough to be with him for 10 years. I'll show you guys a picture of him.
Yes,
So
quite
this is my
precious.
Sherbert, the love of my life. Um,
Precious.
he's so precious. So he had liver disease um, for 3 years. And over those 3 years, he had a lot of involvement with the medical system um, because a lot of it was like, we don't really know what's going on. And it took a while before he was actually diagnosed.
Mm,
But because he had such a positive attitude, and I'm sure a lot of people with orange cats have similar experiences, he was so gregarious and happy. He loved going to the vet because he got to socialize with people. I think that really protected him from having it be like less traumatic of an experience for him. But he declined, and in early 2020, right before the pandemic, it's like
mm,
he knew um, they said he was terminal, and actually my friend came and took photos. She was a photographer, and she came and took these photos a couple days before he passed.
mm,
So that was really, really meaningful. Um, and he he was able to pass at home in our bedroom, which I was also very grateful for because during the pandemic, um, it was really, really difficult. People weren't able to be with their pets when they were put down, and that was extremely traumatizing for a lot of people. So I'm very grateful that he was able to pass before COVID happened and we didn't have to, kind of pass him off
mm.
to the clinic and then not be able to be there. Um, this was by far the most intense grief I've ever experienced, and I have lost humans close to me. But the intensity of this sadness and loss was something I've never experienced. And, this has been 4 years since he's been gone. I think about him every single day. Um, he's part of my day. He's part of me, and that will never go away.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. Gosh, and I understand the emotions. I was just an hour before we went live, I was thinking about our conversation and what I might share about my cats that have passed away, and I was getting emotional.
I know, it's so hard, it's just like, you can't help it's so raw,
Mhm.
even as time goes on, it's always with you, and that's the thing about grief. Your relationship to it changes, but it never goes.
Yeah. And it's interesting because, you mentioned you've had human loss, and sometimes that grief of the animal can be even deeper, and we
Yeah,
feel that, and everybody is different, and
of
we're we'll
course.
we'll chat about that. For those that maybe don't know, I'm gonna give a brief, rundown of my journey with grief, and just so you are a little bit more familiar with it too, Chelsea. So I've lost 2 pets, Nomar, and they were both cats. Nomar and Mia, I got them together. They weren't from the same litter, but they were the same age. No, and radically different experiences in terms of, just how things went down. Nomar, I lost him before the pandemic as well. It was August of 2019.
Mm,
I was living in Colorado at the time, but I was about to move to Tennessee, which is where I live now. And he passed away about a week and a half prior to me
mm.
moving. It was devastating because I, you know, planned my entire journey around having 2 cats to move with and the stress that comes with that.
Oh, yeah.
And they were both 16 at the time, Nomar and Mia. And Nomar just I got them checked out at the, vet on a Friday, and just to make sure, "Hey, are they good to go for a long drive?" And we didn't do, like, the intensive blood work or anything like
Right.
that, but they just did some checks and said everything was good. And so, it was so interesting, like, Mia needed a tooth pulled, so we were gonna do that the next Monday.
Mm.
Well, she had to have blood work done just because of her age, and they found out she had kidney disease the days she was gonna get her tooth pulled. So, I was worried about Mia. 2 days later, which was a Wednesday after they both got checked out, Nomar started to decline, just like,
Mm.
he's under the bed, he's not interactive, he's not eating or drinking as much, and I started to get worried, but it really, kinda went downhill Thursday and then overnight Thursday into Friday. It was a time where it's like the worst possible timing. My car was in the mechanic.
No,
I
no.
I live alone,
Oh,
so I had to call an Uber.
oh my
Fortunately,
god.
the vet was like a 2-minute drive. Unfortunately, also, my normal vet was on vacation. So she had seen him the Friday prior, but she had left for vacation. So he had to see a strange vet that had never seen him before. And fortunately, I had the vet tech that I always had. So she was a source of comfort. But you know, it just looked like he wasn't doing well, and I made the decision to let him go. After consulting my friend came to meet with me who
Good.
knew both of my cats
Yeah.
intimately. I was calling my sister who
Good.
experienced cat loss before, and I had the vet, and I was trying to get as much information as I could to make the best possible decision. And just from that, I had those feelings of guilt afterward because he wasn't diagnosed with anything. And
Right.
we don't know exactly still to this day what went wrong. Now, fast forward to Mia, who I lost a little bit over a year ago. She was 20. So she had the
Ooh,
diagnosed with kidney disease. And then I lost Nomar 5 days later. Devastating. Mia hung tough with that kidney disease, and she actually never got her tooth pulled because we don't wanna put her with anesthesia and her other medical illness. And so she was living with some tooth pains for the last few years, kidney disease, eventually we had to do fluids, um, and then, in January so she passed away June of 2023.
hmm,
In January of 2023, 6 months prior, her mobility got a lot worse. She had a lot of arthritis. That got worse to the
Mhm.
point where it looked really bad in January. I thought, "Oh my gosh, is this it?" And
Right.
then she got a little bit better, but she didn't have the capability anymore of even going up and down the cat stairs, to
No.
my bed or my sofa. So from January of 2023 to June of 2023, uh, I slept on the floor with her, just on a sofa cushion. And then, unfortunately, a month before she passed away, she got lymphoma.
Oof, yeah.
And with, we started on steroids, but just with her, she was so frail uh, that, I kept having to take her to the vet for various things like arthritis, and then not eating and that sort of thing. So when I went into the vet June 23rd, 2023, we were just kinda get her mobility checked out. Well, they checked her white blood cell count and lymphocyte count as well, and it was time to say goodbye. So for hers, even though she had been ill for a while, and was kinda prepping me for it, I still didn't know on that day I took her in that that was gonna be
What
goodbye.
the day, yeah.
Same thing with Nomar when I took him in, didn't know it was gonna be goodbye.
Oof.
And we'll talk about I'm sorry to tell my
You're
own
fine.
story so long, but
You're fine.
and we'll talk about maybe more how I've gone through my grieving process, but one thing I do wanna share, since I lived alone, worked alone, it was just me and Mia the last 4 years after Nomar passed away, so we got each other through things, and I was her caretaker 24/7. All that's gone suddenly, like that,
Suddenly, yes. Yeah.
suddenly. And so I was scared to live in my apartment alone. It's too quiet, Chelsea.
Yep.
Shit.
Totally.
So I
Totally.
crashed on my friend's sofa, my friend who was there for Nomar's goodbye, and she moved from Colorado to Knoxville just kind of coincidentally, and she was there for Mia's goodbye. I slept on her sofa for like 4 months because I was scared to be alone. I was like, I'm gonna spiral if I'm alone, so I need to be with people,
Totally.
be with at least
Totally.
one other person. And she has a cat
Yeah.
too, so that kind of helped. So just wanted to share for those watching or listening, we know that it is devastating. Whatever you're feeling right now is going to be normal because
Yep.
that's how you're feeling.
Yep.
And we're going to talk more about that. But so thanks for listening to my story.
Yeah, and I wanna highlight too in that journey and in my journey as well, how important community is
Mm,
and people who have known the animal, that was really important to me as well. Like a friend of mine, after Sherbert passed, sketched a line drawing of him, and it's actually framed next to my desk.
very
And it literally meant like the world to me. And
yeah,
people who can support you and love you, especially as they had kind of their own unique relationship with the animal, is just really, really powerful.
yeah, yeah. I totally agree. Chelsea, what did you find most challenging about the grieving process after losing Sher?
Oof, what didn't I find challenging? Well, what's really interesting, and I think this is fascinating for a lot of people. So I found Sherbert when I was in graduate school to become a therapist. And he was a huge part of how I decompressed after work, how I manage stress of the job that I do. Like my job is not easy. And when you find ways that you can manage that stress, it's really important and helpful. And then all of a sudden, overnight, my main coping mechanism was gone. My best friend and, you know, eh, living being that I relied on for just like taking me out of my daily life was suddenly gone. And I actually had to learn how to honestly do my job without the biggest support system that I had had from the very beginning. Because at that point, I found him in 2010 when I started grad school, and he died in 2020. So he had been with me my entire career.
I know when you when we say like the years, like I got Mia and Nomar got in 2003 and Mia passed away in 2023. I'm like, "Oh my
That's
gosh, the
amazing.
lifespan of like what was life like in 2000 this year? Like where I was and oh my gosh, it's beyond wild to think about how big a part of my life she was,
Exactly.
and just
Yes.
for that length of time.
Yeah.
Um, and
Like
we
who you
talked
were in 2003
yeah,
versus who you were
I
in
know.
2023. Yeah.
And we've talked about how, um, grief of a pet can be very unique and different
Yes.
from other types of grief, but can you go maybe in your own experience, Chelsea, on, like, what is the difference between pet loss grief and other types of.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's a couple of reasons why pet loss grief can be unique as opposed to other forms of grief. Um, the first, one of the biggest ones is that societally, it can be considered what we call disenfranchised grief, which is society doesn't really recognize it as like a legitimate kind of grief. You and I, who are both like big cat people and animal lovers, are like, yeah, absolutely, we get it. Right. But societally, there isn't necessarily that same endorsement of the feelings that people go through. So there's some ambiguity in navigating those feelings, and people often kind of judge themselves for having these strong emotional responses because socially it's not as discussed or highlighted as saying losing a person is in your life. So that's a main way. Another reason that pet grief can be really different is just because of the level of intimacy that you have with animals that you don't always have with other humans, like you live alone. When I had Sherbert, like I was a single gal, right? And he was taking me through dating and finding my now partner and all of that. And they go through life with you in a way that other people don't. And even if people do, human relationships tend to be a lot more complicated
Mm.
than kind of the purity of the connection with an animal.
Yeah, and, it's just so interesting because, like, before my cats died, I would see people post about their pet passing away on Facebook, let's say, for example, and I'd be sad for them, but I didn't feel what I feel now for them because I know I've been through that journey, so I know what they're
Mm.
experiencing. And you're right, then, I'll share my grief with other people and they don't quite understand it because they've never had a pet, let's say. My parents, for example, we didn't have pets growing up,
Mm.
as kids, and they still, I've never known my parents to own a pet. So while they're there for me and they understand I'm sad, I don't think they understand the level of, um, sadness and the
Yeah,
various emotions that you can go through when losing a pet.
100%.
Yeah.
And that's why again, going back to community, it's so important to have conversations like this and let people know they're not alone and it's not strange or abnormal to feel these really intense feelings.
Yeah. Chelsea, how can somebody begin to understand and honor their own unique process of grieving after losing a pet?
It's a great question. First and foremost, and you alluded to this previously, is there's no proper way to grieve. There's no specific outline. Um, and so understanding that first and also understanding that, uh, like I said earlier, grief never really goes away, but your relationship to it changes,
Mm,
right? Um, I think it's definitely important to be mindful of creating space to allow yourself to connect with what you're feeling and to sit in that. Because if we don't allow ourselves to feel what we feel, it's going to come out in ways that we don't love.
mm,
Right? Think of just kind of like energy trying to escape, like a soda bottle that you shake, right? And that fizz, it's going to get out in some way. You have the option of either gently letting it out on your own terms, or it's going to come out in its own way. So really creating space and opportunities, whether that's with like by yourself, with other people, to let yourself be present and feel what you need to feel.
mm. Yeah, you alluded to like your relationship with it changes, but it never goes away. which we can attest to because we both got emotional. You
I
know,
know.
just my first pet loss was 5 years ago, and you lost Sherbert 4 years ago, and I still get tears and cry, if I see pictures of them
Yeah.
or I'm talking about them, but there's other times where I can talk about them and it just lights me up, you
Well,
know, and have
yeah.
so much joy,
Yeah.
so
I think that was one of the biggest changes for me of like, probably honestly wasn't until last year that when I thought of him, I focused more on the positive memories than the sadness of him not being here. Of course, I still feel that, but there definitely is a switch of like the celebration and remembrance of him and keeping his spirit and memory alive, like in our home, in our family, especially with Z because they were like BFFs. Um, and it's switched more to that than just sadness and just loss.
and for those watching, if you have comments, questions, you might have a question about your own unique journey, please feel free to, leave us a comment and we'll try to answer that. Um, the first day
Mhm.
after losing a pet or the day of can be, of course, devastating. The first week, the first month. What is your best advice or what is some advice for somebody that it's so recent, somebody that's just lost their pet yesterday or they're going through their first week without their pet? How can they start to move through this grieving process?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say if you have the privilege to take times,
Mm.
right? Uh, you are experiencing a lot of emotions and honestly, grief, we feel it in our physical bodies, right? We feel that heaviness, we feel that sadness. So if you're able to take some time from work, from other responsibilities, take it. And I realize that's, a huge privilege to be able to do. And honestly, the basics, we need to focus on the basics. Are you eating? Are you drinking water? Are you getting rest? And are you isolating? Because you don't need to like be super social, but it is important to have at least one person that knows what's going on with you and that you can get support from. Because being in your own mind and your own brain 24/7 can be a really like messy thing. And you need social support during this time.
Yeah, that first day I remember distinctly with both of mine. I went for a walk. Uh in a place that, like a greenway with trees, and I would hear birds chirping, and birds chirping is one of my favorite sounds, like, in
Mhm.
nature, but I didn't like it on this day. This was the day I lost, my cats, and it just I was just, so sad that, like, the birds chirping represented life, and I just lost
Mm,
my cats, and I
yeah.
was thinking, like, they'll never be able to hear that sound again, and
Mm,
it's not fair. I want them to still be a
yeah.
part of life, and it was just I remember distinctly that, so and again, somebody else may hear birds chirping, and that may be a source of comfort for them during their
Right.
grieving phase.
Right.
Uh, so that goes back to the how we all process this differently.
Right. Well, and I think with that too, the uniqueness of each person is don't be afraid to ask whoever your support system is what you need from them.
Mm,
Right. So
yeah.
some people are like, hey, I want to like talk and process and like, can you hold space for me? And other people are probably like, hey, can we just like sit and watch a movie and not talk to each other?
Mm.
Right. And so being clear about, and it's okay also if you don't know what you need, that's okay too. But if you do have some sense of like, what kind of environment would be comforting to you, let the people that care about you know that because that helps them not be so anxious as well. Of like, how do I help this person I love? That they want to support you, but they might not know exactly how.
Yeah. I too both of mine were really unique. When after Nomar passed away, the next day, I was having a kind of a going away party for myself because I was moving from Colorado to Tennessee, and it was just horrible timing, and I decided to still have it. I mean, we kind of,
Yeah.
in the Facebook event made that announcement, and I still had it, which was, I think, good because I was amongst people and friends. And when Mia passed away, gosh, she passed away the day I was supposed to leave town to celebrate my mom's 80th birthday.
Oh, geez. Yeah.
And, and I'm like, and it was a hard decision anyway. I was actually fighting with that decision before she passed away because she was sick. I was like, well, maybe I'll stay home, just take care of Mia. Then she passed away, so there was no real reason for me to stay, home, and my parents live, or actually, we were meeting them at my sister's house, like
Mm,
5.5 hours away.
mm,
But my friend who was there for Mia's passing, she volunteered to drive me because
mm.
when you've just experienced a loss like that, I didn't wanna be driving on the road myself by
Right.
myself for 5.5 hours, so
Right.
very unique circumstances that I
Totally. Yeah.
um, and I do wanna share, I actually have a resource, to give away. It's a free guide, 21 reminders for your first month of pet loss grief,
Mm,
because, like you said, we need to think about, are we taking care of ourselves? Are we giving ourselves grace and
yes.
compassion? So
Yeah.
if you'd like that resource, just comment 21 and I will make sure to get that to you. Chelsea, what are some common misconceptions about grieving the loss of a
Mm,
pet?
yes. Oh, you got such good questions, Scott. I love it. Uh, well, just get another one,
Hmm.
right? Just get another one. Okay. I mean, anyone that's had more than one pet in your life realizes pets have very distinct personalities. Um, they're, I mean, of course, I'm like, oh, they're like little people, but they have their own personality, right? And so when someone says, oh, just get another one, these aren't inanimate objects. These are living beings who have souls and opinions and likes and dislikes. And you can't just replace that
Hmm.
with another one. So I think that's a really big one. Um, Again, that time heals all wounds, right? That kind of old adage. Um, I would say time changes the wound, but if we go with that metaphor, there's always a scar, right?
Hmm.
Being scarred to that wound. Um, yeah, I mean, I think like also this idea of like, well, pets don't live as long as humans, so you knew this was gonna happen. Right? So, like, somehow if you cognitively know this is gonna happen, it makes it easier, which isn't true. Like, we know humans are eventually gonna die. That doesn't make our relationship with death easier, right? So, like, being mindful of some of these things, these adages that people say, that come up a lot, again, in relationship to that disenfranchised grief and not really equating it with other forms of loss.
Yeah, and I think even like, I didn't have to experience this, but um work, like, right?
Mm,
Like
yeah.
if you had a regular job that you had to go to, and I've actually, I think I put a post in Facebook in a pet loss grief group about how much time off work did you get? And I think a lot of bosses, right, are maybe not as understanding that, hey, pet loss grief can be as devastating as, like we've talked about, losing a kid, losing a spouse.
Yeah,
And it takes more than just like, hey, you can have tomorrow off and then come back to work. And I think
totally.
that's probably a big misconception. Like, just get back to work. And
Yeah, to get back to it. Yeah.
yeah, if I had had to go to a real job after I lost Mia, let's say, for example, because she was the most recent one, I don't know how I would have done it,
Yeah.
to be honest.
Well, and yeah, I mean, in my job too, I have to, it's not about my emotions, right? And so I definitely had to take some time off in order before I could go back and be an effective therapist. So, um, but I was self-employed at that time. So I could be a little bit more flexible, but that's a really good point.
Yeah. Could you walk us through some strategies that you use to help somebody who may be navigating the loss of a pet?
Absolutely. So once we get past the basics, right, of just like, which we don't want to just surpass, the basics of self care, self compassion, all of that important stuff. Um, we want to start to look at meaning making in relationship to the loss. So essentially, that relates to creating a cohesive narrative around what the meaning of this life was in
Mhm,
your life, um, creating meaning around the loss, and then inherently celebrating or at least remembering. So I love the word remember because you're you're going over the memory
mm,
of your pet. So
mm,
the remembering. So some examples of this might be um, writing out. Some people like journaling is really helpful. So perhaps writing out kind of the story of how they came to have this pet, their relationship to the pet, all the way through the loss of their pet. Um, Creating a podcast or show in honor of your cat, um, donating to organizations in honor of your pet. I have Sherbert's ashes in a necklace that I
mm.
wear often. I should have worn it today. Um, but creating rituals, like all of this meaning making, is super important in relationship to the loss, because just as our relationship to our grief changes, you still have a relationship with that pet. It's just gonna look different because they're not physically here anymore.
Yeah, I love it. Were you saying the word, meaning?
Re mm, Sorry, what?
I'm just
Like, in what part? In what
sorry,
part?
I think
Meaning
you're
making.
meaning making?
Yeah, yeah,
Meaning making, okay.
yeah.
I hadn't heard of that term before, but I think I'm
Mhm.
doing some of those things that you
Yes.
mentioned, but I love taking it from, like, when you first got the pet all the
Yeah.
way through, your current memories. That's amazing. Okay, so I know one of the biggest emotions that people have when they lose their pet is guilt. I've
Mm,
just seen it time and time again, whether, we think we didn't do enough, towards the end when the pet maybe was sick, or even if let's say a dog ran out and got hit by a car. I just know it is a tremendous burden to feel guilt, when you've lost a pet and you're already trying to grieve. So guilt just kinda
right.
piles on that. What advice can you give us, or how can you help navigate those of us that may be feeling guilty for the loss of their pet?
Yeah, guilt is a really challenging emotion. Um, and I wanted to address this, and I'm glad you bring it up. The incidence of traumatic loss when it comes to pet loss is something to be mindful of. So, like, honestly, I don't consider what I went through a traumatic loss,
Mm,
in the sense that I knew it was coming, I knew he was sick, and we were able to kind of plan when he passed. Um, a traumatic loss typically has to do with um, an immediate accident, um, or a pet dying when they're young, right? Like an
mm,
untimely death, those types of things. Um, so when traumatic loss happens, that tends to increase the likelihood that someone's going to feel guilt. But of course, a lot of people feel guilt in relationship to any time of pet loss. So guilt comes up when, as humans, we have a sense that we can control just about anything. Um, there's this worldview called the just world theory, which is like, if I do good and I follow the rules, then good things are going to happen for me. Right. And worldviews like that help us organize structure in a really chaotic world. So when something like loss happens, deaths happen that we don't have any control or influence over, that challenges our worldview, right? And so what ends up happening is people internalize the locus of control to themselves as like, well, I did something, I could have changed something, because that is more comforting to them than being like the world is really big and scary and unpredictable,
Yeah.
right? It's easier to be like, well, it's me.
Mhm.
I did
Yes.
something, as opposed to saying, wow, we all have to face death at some point, and that's terrifying.
Yeah. And I mentioned when I lost Nomar, I felt guilty because, you know, I part of it, it was traumatic in the sense that my normal vet wasn't there, so I was like, "This vet
Yeah.
what doesn't know Nomar," but I still made the decision to say goodbye even though we didn't have a concrete diagnosis, and that really bothered me and got more intense as the days and the weeks went on. And I don't have it on me, but I got a journal with Nomar's name kind of engraved on it. And I started writing letters to him just to
Love
tell
that.
him, like how
Love
much I
that.
loved him. And
Yep.
then I started to think about this mantra, two things were I loved him more than anything else in the world, and I did the best I could
Yep.
with the resources I had at the time, and just
Yep.
to make myself and I'm not saying the guilt will ever go away 100%, but it has lessened, and I think those things have helped me.
Yeah,
Uh,
and so what you were doing, you were intentionally taking charge of the narrative that you applied to that situation,
mhm.
right? So for me, were there things I probably could have done to prolong Sherbert's life? Absolutely. But they wouldn't have improved his quality of life. And for me, with all my animals, my whole life, it's been about quality more than quantity. And so I see it as the ultimate act. And this, I realize, is my story and my narrative. I see it as the ultimate act of compassion and love to say,
Mm,
I'm going to help stop your suffering.
yes.
Like, that's huge. So for me, that helps me if, if I'm feeling feelings of guilt or like those questions of, could I have done more? And those questions are so natural and common because we want people, we want our animals, we want people to live the best lives they can. But quality, I think, is so much more important than quantity, in
Yeah.
my opinion.
And I have a cool resource. I'm excited about this. So I put a short book together called "It's Not Your Fault."
Oh, I love
Uh,
that.
and it's really cool because I decided to so the book is kind of a lesson on how to help you through this feelings of guilt that you might have with pet loss. But the characters so I have characters in the book. They're myself, Nomar, and Mia, and it's Mia teaching me a lesson of not feeling guilty about the loss of Nomar, and then I hired, somebody to illustrate it. Almost looks like a children's book, but it's made
Yeah.
for adults, and it could be,
Yeah.
made for children as well. But if you're interested in that, it's a free, downloadable book. Just in the comments, if you're watching here, just write the word or type the word "book," and I'll be sure to get that to you.
Mhm.
Another emotion I see people or maybe not an emotion, but what a lot of people experience when they've lost their pet, and I've gone through this as well, is almost like how do we carry on with our lives? How do we pick ourselves back up? For many of
Yeah.
us, it's just so devastating. It knocks us down. We can't get up. How do we start to almost rebuild our lives and start to get back to where we wanna be without our pets being there?
Yeah. Well, Scott, I want to first say that you are a model of, I think, what it means to create meaning making and build this relationship with your cats who are now no longer here. But it's so evident that you're still connected to them, right? And just like I'm like, everyone just do what Scott's doing. Just so good. Like, and the like, so I just commend you for that because um this takes time. So, first and foremost, having patience with yourself and again, not rushing things, But I think it's important to remember, especially early on when things are just so hard, is remembering that the love that you shared with your animal is not gone just because they're gone. I think that's so important.
Yeah.
And there's my little Z butt. She's
Oh,
eating at her little table.
wait, let me see. Oh,
Little
yeah,
butt. That's
I
my
could see
sweetie.
just a
So
little bit.
yeah, her little butt. Um, but yeah, allowing yourself to take time to really process what's happened
Mhm.
and realize that the love that you shared with this animal is still very much there. And how can that love motivate you, right? Like,
Yeah.
how would your animal want you to continue? Would your animal want you to be at home and isolate yourself and not share the joy that you shared with them in the rest of your life, right? So like finding ways to give and receive love is really important, whether that's with other humans or other animals. And realizing that it's going to be hard, right? Accepting that these really challenging emotions, there's no quick fix, there's no pushing it away, but letting that love kind of move you forward and guide you into other contexts.
Mm. Yeah, beautiful. I want to talk more about this idea of honoring our pets. Um, like you mentioned, it's not going to be something that happens right away for a
Right.
lot of us. And I wanted to share a couple things that I'm doing that, we talked about like this show, the Cat Dad show. I wanted to put this together to just as a way to remember Mia and Nomar. And the initial concept was going to be all about pet loss and meditations and grieving. But after, talking to some other people, they were suggesting that I put together something that just really aligns with even my personality. So the cat dad show just
I
really
love
I like embracing that I'm a cat dad and
Mhm.
I'm having interesting conversations not only with you about grieving pet loss, but our last conversation was with a woman who's traveling in a van with her cat. That's fun.
So
That goes
fun.
along with my personality and how I, think of Nomar and Mia. They were fun cats. A couple other things I wanted to share that I'm doing just to possibly give some people some inspiration. And the caveat is to find something that really excites you and has meaning for you.
Yes.
Um, but I'm really big into nature and the healing powers of nature when it comes to our mental well-being, for example. So here in Knoxville, in a couple months, I'm putting together a tribute hike to help for people that have lost a pet, so we can honor and remember our pets out in nature on a hike. Um, and, we're going to be carrying 10 pounds of pet supplies in our backpacks and then donating the pet supplies. And I want to make it an upbeat thing,
Yeah.
not a something where we're tearful, but meaningful.
Yeah.
So we're gonna have a memory wall where we can hang pictures of our pets. We're gonna write gratitude letters to our pets. We're gonna have an adoption event and food trucks and vendors and just have a nice celebration. And again, in my head, I'm doing it like the drive for me to do this, even though it's hard to put on an event like that, is Mia and Nomar. I was thinking
Yep.
Mia and Nomar. And then one final thing is when I had to take care of Mia, her vet bills were expensive. And I always thought to myself, like I had this kind of mantra, I never want to have to make a decision on her medical health based around finances. Fortunately, I was able to cover, I didn't have to ever do any expensive surgeries, and I don't know how I would have, but
Yeah.
the decision has to be heartbreaking if you have to decide whether to move forward for your pet's health and the medical maybe solutions to help them feel better and live longer based on finances.
Absolutely.
So for like the hike, for example, where I'm fundraising, so the participants will make a donation and all that money will go to people with high vet bills that are having trouble paying them off. And again, for some reason that is really driving me. That seems like my mission now out in the world is to raise money and do things to help people grieving the loss of their pet or to help people who are experiencing high vet bills. And for me, that's meaning. That's why when I talk about Mia and Nomar, for the most part, I have joy and a smile on my face, but I didn't have that, 6 months ago. I was sleeping on my friend's sofa. So just for those watching who maybe are in the
Yeah.
early stages of grief, just we hear you and
Mhm.
we have a lot of sympathy for you. But yeah, so that's just some of the things that I'm doing to honor my loved
I love
ones.
that. And again, that it takes time to get there, right? Um, and it's okay if you take forever, like there's no time limit on processing all these emotions, but there will be a day where you get a smile on your face more so than just sobbing. Um, there will be a day when that comes. And I think we both can attest to being there. And it's a good feeling, even though we miss our babies every single day.
Yeah. Yeah. And just know like with especially with No More, because that was my first one and I wasn't expecting it.
Yeah.
And then I moved to a new state and I hardly knew anybody. So like, your brought those tears can bring you to your knees, man. Just
Absolutely.
you
Absolutely.
are crying the hardest you may ever cry in your life, and you don't know doesn't seem like an end to it. Um,
Well, and Scott, a question for you I have is also how do you think, especially because your losses were like fairly close together, how do you think the first loss impacted the second one?
great question. I think it may have impacted me in a way because, it's almost like I can brace myself,
Mm,
like yeah, and realize that I can get through it. They were different in the sense that with Mia, she was sick for so long. I
right.
was like, okay, she's not going to last forever. She
Right.
turned 20.
Right.
That's a great milestone, but the end's
Totally.
coming soon. But still, like, I say goodbye to her at 20. I'm like, darn it, I wanted 21,
I know. It's
But I
never
think
enough.
just knowing, like, I got a Mia journal, and so writing
Mhm.
like, I wrote letters to Nomar, and I wrote a lot more to Nomar than
Mm,
I did to Mia probably because, just different circumstances, and I felt guilty with Nomar. I didn't with Mia. My vet with Mia said something that I really am so grateful for. She said
mm,
this was the exact right time. Like, you didn't hang around
mm.
long.
Yeah.
You're not saying goodbye too soon.
Right.
And I was like, gosh, that was a blessing for her to say that. But I
Mhm.
just think knowing like, almost like, I mean, it's cliche, there's a light at the end of the tunnel. I found that light with the loss of
Mhm.
Nomar. And when Mia passed away, even though I was down for the count, I think just having experienced that before probably helped me through
Mhm.
Mia's
Mhm.
grief. The hard part was, like I mentioned, once Mia was gone, there wasn't another cat to help me. When Nomar was gone, me and Mia, we bonded
Mhm.
even more.
Right. Right.
Yeah,
Which can be the case. And I think also acknowledging for some people, it can actually be hard to like move forward with an existing animal, right? So I think there's a lot of different ways that that can play out. Maybe you bond more with the animal that's left. Maybe you have like some other feelings, and that's
yeah,
okay too.
yeah.
Yeah,
And I do want to acknowledge that grieving a loss of a pet isn't just a pet dying.
right.
It could be, a pet runs away.
Mhm.
I actually spoke with somebody who was listening to my pet loss meditations, and she had to rehome her pet, and
Mhm.
she was, experiencing a tremendous amount of grief and loss and guilt
Yep.
for that. So there are different ways that, pet loss can manifest itself. It's not
Right.
just a death.
And I think naming ambiguous grief was really important because that's more related to if you don't know what happened to your animal,
Mm.
right? If they're lost, if you rehome them and maybe you don't get updates. Those are all examples of ambiguous grief where we don't have that kind of concrete uh, ending per se. And that's really tough too. I've experienced that. I lost a cat. It was actually the cat Sherbert. I found him with that cat. Um, and unfortunately, I was living with someone who was allergic, and so they were like, "Can you either have them in your bedroom or outside?" And I let her out one night. Her name was Salem, and she never came back. And I felt guilty for years. I mean, newsflash for people: therapists are just humans with fully
Mm.
skills. Uh, and I struggled with guilt for years, and it took me a long time to truly believe in my heart, like, things happen that are out of my control. Um, and, I was really happy the time we had together. And I still get really sad when I think about her and wonder what happened. Um, but I was able to continue that love, for her and give that love to other animals, which I think she would have been really happy about.
I'm glad that you mentioned that, therapists are human. We think like, "Hey, you don't have to go through this," but have the skills, but
Yeah,
yeah, you do. And I do some health and wellness coaching, but I go through, my ups and
yeah,
downs and have
yeah.
anxiety, and
Yep.
I just, know how to ask a few good questions.
Exactly, exactly. Because it's a
Uh,
process. It's
right.
it's a process.
Yeah. So losing a pet can cause you to feel isolated, lonely. I especially felt that way after losing Mia because I didn't have anybody else. I was living alone. I work alone, didn't have any other pets at the time. So I had extreme loneliness where I had to crash on a friend's sofa for 4 months just to help with that. Um, Chelsea, how could you help somebody who lost their pet overcome those feelings of isolation and loneliness?
Yeah. Well, first, we want to distinguish being alone versus feeling lonely because you can be around people and still feel lonely,
Yes,
right?
absolutely. Yeah.
Um, so, again, what particular kind of support do you need, right? For some people, that might be being with a close confidant. With other people, that might be just like going out in public and physically being around other people. Um, but it's really important to gently nudge yourself to reach out. Again, that looks different for different people, but one of the worst things you can do is physically isolate yourself, um, because we're social beings and we're meant to be around others, right?
Yeah.
Um, I know for some people, it can be comforting to like go to the park and be, you see all these animals. I used to take Sherbert a couple times in like a little backpack thing, where you carry your cat in the backpack. Um, and seeing people with that would like make me happy. So it's really specific to you, but reach out to someone that cares about you. Um, Strangers, I mean, the internet is good and bad for a lot of things, but the really great thing about the internet is you can reach out to very specific groups of people who are probably experiencing similar things you are and can really empathize with what you're going through. So if you can't physically kind of be with other people, maybe reach out to some people on the internet who might be going through similar things.
Yeah, and then, like you said, everybody needs different things. Again, I mentioned when I lost Mia, I was leaving town to celebrate my mom's 80th birthday, but that turned out to be a blessing because I was with family. I had a friend there. So for the first few days after losing Mia, I was with family, and that's
Right.
really what I needed at the time. I didn't wanna be alone, and that really just the love that came from my family, and we were focused on my mom there, for, obvious reasons, being her birthday, so that really, really helped me through my initial first days of, grieving.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I do want to share one more resource. I put together a comprehensive list of pet loss resources. I know that can be helpful for people to help with pet loss grief. I've got over 50 resources listed. If you're watching, just comment the word resources in the chat and I'll make sure to get that to you. All right. Well, this is a big one, Chelsea. A lot of times we don't have hope. We're going through pet loss. We don't feel like there is that light at the end of the tunnel. How do we help somebody find or just not feel hopeless anymore? And that there is going to be a time where we don't feel this because it's easy for us to say that, right? Like, hey, it's
Totally.
eventually you won't feel this, but for somebody who feels like their world has come crashing down and it's over,
Yep.
can we do or what advice do you have to help them?
Yeah. So one of my old professors, he did some research on hope and what actually builds hope. And I reference that a lot in my work with folks, especially related to grief and loss. And the four components, we can go through them. And I have people literally like answer each kind of component
Yeah.
to build hope. So those four components are action. So what can you do? Right. And as we've talked about today, there's so many things you can do to create meaning, to honor your pet, to share the love that you had with your pet. Those actionable items are super important. Evidence. So just like for you, you know, when you lost Mia, you were able to kind of know what to expect, and there was evidence that you could get through pet loss. So that evidence came from your own life, but evidence can also come from other people's stories. So again, us sharing our stories, hopefully that's evidence for other people that they can get there too. Option, right? We can feel really hopeless when we feel like we have no option. So what are some options? You know, maybe, joining a pet loss support group, maybe it's going to therapy, maybe it's just talking to a friend. What are options you have to process this grief? And then the last one is connection, right? Which I come to, I know I beat it over and over and over into you, but we are wired for connection and we need each other in order to support each other. So how are you connecting with other people? And again, that can be in person, online, but it's important that you do connect.
Yeah. Great. I love this. Things that we can take away and start doing. And just wanted to give some encouragement out there that you are stronger than you think. And one just personal example when I had to make that decision about Mia and my friend was with me, I said, I'm you get flooded with emotion. Like, how do I make this decision? Like, hey, you know, put Mia to sleep and never see
Mhm.
her again. And I remember saying to my friend, I'm not strong enough. I'm not strong. I can't. I'm not strong enough. And she encouraged me. She's like, yes, you are. And, I've made it. I've made it through. I made it through that day. Just so if maybe you're watching this and you are about to say goodbye to your pet and you're anticipating that just and maybe you have different words of encouragement for just I wanted to give those words. You are stronger than you think.
Yeah. And again, I just say what's best for your animal,
Mm,
and you know them, you love them in your heart. You probably know what's best for them.
yeah, yeah. And Chelsea, we've mentioned that you are a therapist out in Seattle, but I believe you do some virtual sessions as well. And you help people through anxiety and grief and trauma. At what point should somebody consider seeking professional help for their grief, especially again if they're struggling with the loss of their pet and maybe it's their grief isn't getting any better?
Yeah. I would say, if you're feeling very stuck,
Mhm.
and again, that looks different for different people, but if you're feeling really stuck and completely hopeless, and you find that's interacting with your day to the effect of it's challenging to get through your day, then it might not be a bad idea to talk to somebody.
And for what it's worth, I'm a huge fan of it. Uh, I
Mm,
it was a blessing for me because the University of Tennessee, they have a social work pet loss kind of department, if you will, and they offer 6 free grief counseling sessions. And I moved here right after I lost Nomar, and I was here, um, when Mia passed away. And for those, I guess I didn't, paint the picture, University of Tennessee is in Knoxville, Tennessee, which is where I live. So I was able to take advantage. I was excited about it because
mhm,
I prefer not to keep things inside. And even though I had my best friend here, Lori, I wanted to speak to a professional about it and
totally.
have them ask me questions, just like you asked me that question
Mhm.
earlier in this interview. So, for those of you who are considering whether or not seeing a professional is going to be helpful, just from my experience, I would say definitely strongly consider it. It could be just for me, just talking about, and don't be ashamed. Like the first session with the one when I talked about when Mia passed away, like I'm bawling. It's like the first couple minutes, I'm like, it was just still so raw, and I'm crying my eyes out. But they don't. It's a no judgment. That's what they're there for. So, Chelsea, can you give us maybe a little bit of more information about what you do, how we can find out more about your work and how to contact?
Yeah. So, like Scott said, I'm in Seattle, Washington. And I work with individuals and families facing grief, anxiety, and trauma. Um, and for now, I'm all virtual. So, unfortunately, I can only work with people in Washington
Oh,
state.
right.
Yeah, unfortunately, well,
Yeah.
law. Um, but you can also follow me on Instagram at Chelsea Kramer Therapy. And I try to like give great tips. I also blog weekly on my website. So check those out for good information.
Awesome. Thank you. And we actually have a couple comments coming in. So, Bonnie, thank you. My show is new, and a lot of times we don't have anybody watching live. So, Bonnie said, "Thank you both so much for sharing. It's 3 weeks today that I
Oh,
lost my soul kitty of 15 years,
oh,
and your
I'm
stories,
sorry.
gosh, I'm going to tear up here. And your stories and advice have helped a lot. Bonnie, I'm really sorry for your loss, and thank you. I'm glad that our stories can help you a little bit. And then Bonnie asked, "Where can I get more information on the upcoming fundraising hiking event?" Yeah, so I've got a website. It's tributehikes.com. So tributehikes.com. And that'll forward you directly to this hiking event that we're having on October 26th. And if you have any questions, Bonnie, you can, of course, leave them in the comments here. You can also email me at, okay, this is a great email address I made for this, catdadshow@gmail.com. Catdadshow@gmail.com. You can always send me an email as well. And then one last question. Chelsea, and this has been great. I've really enjoyed this conversation.
Good.
What's a final message you'd like to share with our listeners or viewers who are currently grieving the loss of a pet?
Mm, I'd say your feelings are valid.
Mm.
Things will get better, and you can carry that love forever in your heart.
Chelsea, thank you. Thank you for those final words. Thank you for being our special guest. I know this isn't an easy topic, but I think the way I'm feeling and the way I think you're probably feeling, we are getting probably some joy in talking about this because we know there's thousands and thousands of people going through this grieving process, and maybe this conversation can help. Uh, and you and I seem like we both are in the business of helping people and just
Yes.
really get fulfillment out of that. So
Yeah.
I've enjoyed our conversation, and I wanted to acknowledge the work that you're doing. It isn't easy helping people every single day. I know sometimes, we need our cups filled, and just the work that you do is so meaningful and so valuable. So thank you for doing that work and for being our guest here in the last hours.
Thank you, Scott. I appreciate that.
You're very welcome. Everybody watching and listening to the Cat Dad Show, thank you so much for tuning into this episode, and we will see you next time. Bye, everybody.